Somewhere inside Suzuki's engineering compound in Hamamatsu, a project has been running for over 2 years that nobody outside the company was supposed to see. No press release, no concept sketch on an auto show floor, just a handful of regional registration filings, a blurry test track photo taken from across a perimeter fence, and a name that keeps resurfacing in supplier paperwork: the Suzuki Scout Mini Camper 4x4. What makes it strange isn't that Suzuki is building something small. That's the brand's entire identity. What makes it strange is how far this particular vehicle strays from anything the company has ever put a badge on. Early filings hint at a fully enclosed sleeping cabin, a self-contained off-grid power system, and a wheelbase short enough to fit inside a single parking space. If even half of what's leaked is accurate, this could be the most future-facing vehicle Suzuki has quietly worked on in a decade. Stay with me, because by the end of this video you'll understand exactly why insiders are calling it Suzuki's most closely guarded project, and why it may already be too late to reserve one. If you want to know the moment anything official drops, hit subscribe now, because none of what you're about to see has been shown anywhere else. Start with what the leaked photos actually show. The Scout measures close to 4 meters and 10 centimeters bumper to bumper, riding on a track narrow enough to thread down a single-lane forestry road without folding in the mirrors. The body sits in a matte, powder-coated color Suzuki's internal documents label only as field khaki. No gloss, no metallic fleck, just a flat working finish that photographs almost military in direct sunlight. The rear third of the vehicle is dominated by a galvanized steel canopy welded directly to a reinforced chassis rail, not bolted on like an aftermarket topper, which tells you this camper box was never meant to be optional. 15-inch wheels wrapped in chunky all-terrain rubber fill the arches almost completely, and a raised air intake runs up the driver's side A-pillar, angled to keep water out during stream crossings. Down the passenger flank, a fold-out awning channel is recessed flush into the bodywork so it doesn't add width when stowed, and a small hatch behind the rear wheel opens to reveal an exterior kitchen slide, already plumbed for a portable stove. The tailgate carries raised S-Scout lettering stamped directly into the sheet metal rather than a stick-on badge. A small detail, but one that suggests this isn't a rushed trim package. Up front, the headlight housings are round rather than the angular LED signatures showing up on most new Suzuki filings elsewhere, a styling choice that reads deliberately retro against an otherwise modern chassis. A full-length skid plate runs from the front recovery points back past the transfer case, bolted rather than riveted, which suggests it's designed to be removed for field servicing rather than treated as a permanent shield. Twin recovery hooks sit exposed at both the front and rear bumper corners, rated, according to one supplier line item, for a working load close to 2 tons, and a full-size spare rides flat against the underside of the chassis instead of mounted on the tailgate, keeping rear visibility clean. The roof carries a raised rack rail system with a single 120-watt solar panel bonded flush to the surface, angled just enough to shed rain without catching wind noise at highway speed. Paint documentation lists 2 additional finishes beyond the field khaki spotted in test photos: a flat graphite and a deep forest green, though which of the 3 becomes the launch color, if any survive at all, isn't confirmed anywhere in the leaked files. If there's an honest knock on the design so far, it's the rear step. It's narrow, mounted high, and looks like it was sized for someone under 5'8", which is an odd oversight on a vehicle this deliberately engineered everywhere else. But everything about the exterior was clearly built to hide what's actually happening on the inside. And that's where this story gets a lot more interesting. Under the hood, supplier documents point to a compact, naturally aspirated 4-cylinder, displacing somewhere close to 1.5 liters, paired with a 5-speed manual and a 2-speed transfer case for low-range crawling. None of these figures are officially confirmed, so treat them as informed estimates rather than settled fact. What is more consistently repeated across the leaked paperwork are three numbers: an estimated 101 horsepower, a ground clearance hovering around 220 millimeters, and an approach angle believed to sit near 34 degrees. Engineering sources close to the Hamamatsu facility put the current global test fleet at somewhere under 40 running units, the majority of them still confined to closed proving grounds in central Japan rather than public roads. That's an unusually small number for a vehicle this far into supplier tooling, and it's part of why so few verified sightings exist. The honest critique here is the gearbox, manual only, with no automatic option mentioned anywhere in the documentation, which could quietly shrink the buyer pool before the vehicle ever reaches a dealer lot. Suspension documentation describes a multi-link rear setup rather than a traditional leaf spring arrangement, tuned, according to one internal memo, specifically to keep the sleeping cabin level on uneven ground rather than to maximize wheel articulation. A small but telling choice for a vehicle designed around overnight comfort as much as capability. Breakover angle is estimated near 26 degrees. Wading depth is listed at roughly 500 millimeters, and the fuel tank is sized at a modest 45 liters, which several supplier notes flag internally as range limited against the vehicle's stated off-grid ambitions. A fair criticism if the final production tank isn't enlarged before launch. Tire spec across every leaked photo shows a consistent 205/70R15 all-terrain fitment, small by modern truck standards, but proportionate to a vehicle this light, and hill descent control appears in the electronics documentation as a standard rather than optional feature. Still, for a machine built around this footprint, the numbers suggest something genuinely capable rather than a lifestyle prop wearing knobby tires for the cameras. Step inside, and the math stops making sense in a good way. The sleeping platform runs the full width of the cabin and converts from a dinette in under a minute, using a strut-assisted panel that folds flat without needing to remove the table insert first. Headroom under the raised section of the canopy clears 6 feet for anyone standing near the rear doors, which is unusual for a footprint this small. Storage lives in shallow drawers built into the wheel well housings rather than bulky overhead cabinets, keeping the center of gravity low for the kind of side slope driving this thing is clearly meant to handle. Looking at this, it feels less like a camper conversion and more like a piece of alpine research equipment that someone quietly gave a license plate to. And here's the detail that catches people off guard. Despite the stripped-back working vehicle exterior, the cabin includes a diesel-fired heating panel with a digital thermostat readout, a feature you'd expect on something twice this price, not tucked into the smallest camper in a brand's lineup. What you won't find, oddly, is a dedicated closet or wardrobe space of any kind. For a build this considered everywhere else, it's a genuine gap, and it's the kind of thing owners will likely solve with aftermarket organizers within the first month of ownership. Lighting throughout the cabin runs on a warm white LED strip recessed into the ceiling trim rather than a single overhead dome, dimmable from a rocker switch mounted beside the entry door, and the wall panels themselves are lined in a closed-cell foam insulation thick enough that supplier documents cite a meaningful drop in road noise compared to the bare metal shell. A fold-down galley counter inside the cabin houses a 2-burner induction cooktop wired directly to the battery bank, positioned so the person cooking faces out through the rear doors rather than into a corner. A small layout decision that changes how the whole space feels when 2 people are trying to move around each other at the same time. Twin USB-C ports sit within reach of the sleeping platform, and a compact Bluetooth speaker is built into the overhead trim near the dinette, which feels like an unusually specific inclusion for a vehicle this utilitarian everywhere else. Underneath the cabin, the off-grid systems are where the leaked documentation gets specific in a way that feels almost accidental. Sources describe a lithium iron phosphate battery bank in the 100 to 120 amp-hour range, fed by a rooftop solar array, believed to output somewhere around 200 watts under ideal conditions. A compressor-driven 12-volt fridge draws directly off that bank, and the fresh and gray water tanks are each sized at roughly 40 liters, modest but proportionate to a vehicle this compact. One detail buried deep in a parts supplier's technical sheet stands out. The inverter housing includes a passive cooling fin design, specifically noted as silent running in the documentation, a spec you'd normally only see disclosed for equipment meant to operate near a sleeping cabin overnight without disturbing anyone inside it. It's a small line item, but it tells you someone on this engineering team was thinking about the 2 a.m. experience, not just the spec sheet. A companion control panel, referenced only by an internal project code name in the documentation, is said to display battery state, tank levels, and tire pressure on a single screen mounted beside the entry door, with a phone pairing feature that several sources describe as still unfinished in current test units. An auxiliary charging port near the rear bumper allows the battery bank to top up from a portable generator without opening the cabin doors, and the gray water valve is fitted with a simple mechanical float indicator rather than an electronic sensor, a deliberately low-tech choice in an otherwise digital system, and one that off-grid users will likely appreciate the first time a sensor would have failed them instead. None of that, though, explains the number that surfaced last month on a leaked regional pricing document, because that number only makes sense once you understand exactly who this camper was built for. There is no confirmed manufacturer's suggested retail price yet, and treat any figure you hear online as speculation until Suzuki says otherwise. Dealer network sources familiar with early pricing conversations suggest a launch figure somewhere in the mid-$30,000 range once the Scout reaches North American showrooms, though that number could easily shift before production tooling is finalized. Leaked trim documentation also references two optional packages under internal working names, one adding a heavier-duty suspension tune and rock sliders, the other adding a winter package with an upgraded heater core and dual-pane cabin windows, though pricing for either hasn't surfaced anywhere in the paperwork reviewed for this video. What's clearer is the intended buyer. This isn't aimed at the 6-month off-grid expedition crowd chasing maximum range and a rooftop tent the size of a small apartment. And it isn't aimed at someone who wants to tow a trailer twice a year and let it sit in the driveway the rest of the time. Based on everything in these documents, the Scout looks built for young couples who want a weekend escape without renting a storage unit for their rig, solo travelers who value maneuverability over square footage, retirees looking to downsize from a full-size motorhome, remote workers who need 4 walls and a desk more than they need a slide-out, and national park travelers tired of circling for a spot big enough for something twice this length. So if that sounds like the way you actually want to travel, tell me in the comments what you'd use the Scout for first. And subscribe so you're here the moment Suzuki makes any of this official. Here's the detail that reframes everything you've just seen. Buried in the leaked documentation is a reference to 2 distinct cabin variants, a fixed hardtop version and a pop-top version with a canvas upper section that raises for standing headroom. Of the fewer than 40 test units believed to exist, sources suggest the pop-top variant accounts for a small minority, possibly single digits, with the rest built as fixed roof units for climate and durability testing. If that split is accurate, it means most of what's leaked so far isn't even the version most buyers will eventually want, which raises the real question. How much of this vehicle is still being quietly revised before anyone outside Hamamatsu sees a finished one? One more detail worth sitting with. Several photographed units carry a small, hand-stamped plate near the entry door with a 2-digit number and nothing else. No model name, no date, just a number. Nobody in the leaked documentation explains what it counts. But hand numbering test units isn't something manufacturers usually bother with, unless they're tracking something deliberately limited, which only adds weight to the idea that whatever ships to customers may bear little resemblance in volume or trim to what's rolling around those Japanese test tracks right now. Picture pulling into an empty trailhead lot at sunrise in something this size, engine off, kettle already warming on the exterior stove slide, with no generator hum and no neighbor 20 feet away in a rig the size of a bus. That's the confidence this project seems engineered around. Not size for its own sake, but a kind of elegant restraint that lets the vehicle disappear into the landscape instead of dominating it. Of that global fleet of under 40 units, insiders now suggest no more than 8 have ever left Japanese soil, which means a verified sighting anywhere else in the world right now is genuinely rare. Suzuki hasn't confirmed a launch date, a final spec sheet, or a single official photo. Everything here comes from filings, supplier leaks, and test track glimpses, which means the full story is still being written in real time. So here's the challenge. Tell me in the comments, yes or no, whether you trust Suzuki's smallest and most secretive project, yet with a real off-grid trip. No hedging, just a straight answer. And if you want to see what happens when a completely different manufacturer attempts this exact same experiment with a dramatically different result, that video is coming next.